Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 6 of In One's Kin. We're going to change things up a little bit and talk about a different kind of literature. I hope everyone enjoys it. I hope everyone enjoyed last week. I had a lot of fun with last week's episode. I'm joined once again by the ineffable Robert.
Hello.
And the illustrious Veet.
Hello, hello.
And I am James. How's it going, guys?
I need to look up that word you used to describe me.
Ineffable?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing.
Don't say it now. It needs to be a secret. I'll find out later.
All right. It wasn't anything bad, I promise. I don't do that.
It was. I'm curious now.
Oh, man. Oh, man. How has your week been, Veet?
Good week, good nerd week. My family and I have watched first 8 episodes of Daredevil and loving it. I was a little concerned with season 1 being such a great season. I thought maybe I was a bit concerned that season 2 may have turned out to be a little lackluster, but that's certainly not the case. Story's great. Action sequences are great. The premise being addressed in the whole storyline is just wonderful. So I'm enjoying that. And finally got to see Batman v Superman about 3 nights ago. Again, had an enjoyable experience. A bit of toing and froing in the household here. My wife didn't enjoy it as much, or probably not at all, really, if we're being honest. And just sort of coming to, and we probably discuss this here when we talk about it with you guys as well, about the perception of what we expect from superhero movies. But good week in general.
Nice. How about you, Robert?
I've seen Batman vs Superman 4 times, and I love it dearly.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Well, I saw it in Idaho before I left, and I stopped where my brother's going to college on the way home, and I saw it was him, and then I saw it was my family when I got back, and then I had a friend who wanted to see it, so I saw it again. But I didn't complain about that. I really did want to go see it all those times, and I could stand to watch it some more. It is funny to me that you mentioned like how there's some divisiveness, because there was a lot of divisiveness over Man of Steel,
Yes.
and I really enjoyed Man of Steel because I was like, man, finally a movie that actually acknowledges that he's a freaking alien, and he gets to punch things, which is fantastic. He actually gets to throw punches. Superman Returns is a movie where you watch him not fight for 2 hours,
True.
Yeah, I was very happy with Man of Steel, and a lot of people were all like, spoiler alert, oh my God, he kills Zod, and I'm just like, what do you expect him to do? You can't put him in a jail. None of the anti-Kryptonian measures are in place in this universe yet. He has threatened to kill every single human being on the planet, and he can do it.
Man,
what are you gonna do?
You pull that weird plastic symbol off your chest and you throw it on them, and they're like, I'm trapped. Oh no.
But even in the Donner films, he kills Zod. I mean, he punts him down the bottomless chasm in the end of the second Superman movie, And
Oh,
so, like,
no.
I don't understand where all this rape from. Yeah, I know.
Okay. All right. No, I think 2 things are happening here with people who are not enjoying either Man of Steel or Batman v Superman. And that's one, I think there's a generation of people who have a expectation of what a superhero movie should be, and that ultimately, and we've been spoiled in recent times because of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where the majority of those movies have a happy ending. Use quotations of the word happy, but there is a satisfactory conclusion to the movie where the superhero comes out on top. Okay, so I think that's one. And 2, and I do think this is the majority. Us 3 are not the majority, in my opinion, where we've read the comic books or we've watched the animated series put out in the last 20 years by Warner Brothers, where we understand that there are different iterations of our favorite superheroes. So if you're one of the people who that basically your only interpretation of Superman or Batman's what you've seen on TV and what you've seen in movies of recent, that these last two movies do take a much darker and a not a wholesome view on these much loved characters. So I can understand, and so my wife and I have been having sort of ongoing discussion about this, and I understand it. I truly do. But
I do too.
Yeah.
I mean, because I totally get that. I mean, you want to talk about a contentious conversational environment, go to a Comic-Con convention. I mean, it's crazy the things people talk about there and how they view certain characters and how they are angry about certain things. I mean, there was a point just recently in the comic books where Superman renounced his American citizenship, and you'd have thought somebody lit the place on fire.
Right.
Yeah, it was something else to believe. You had to see it to really just be like, wow. Cat's flipping out one moment, but I'll take care of that one. You can hear that in the background. My cat is having a fit. I'll take care of it when I'm finished. But wow. Anyways, the thing that really gets to me is I've read many things on the internet right now of people just having a gasket over this portrayal of Batman, and this Batman is ripped almost image for image straight from the Dark Knight Returns comic that was published in 1986, which is easily the most influential comic that's ever affected Batman. I mean, all Batman media since Dark Knight Returns have been altered into a much darker, grittier version of Batman. Adam West has no place here. And
except for
movie,
car shows.
Yeah, sure. But that movie really Batman vs Superman, that is the Batman you're getting, almost scene for scene. In fact, people have made commentary about the amount of violence Batman engages in. He is toned down from the Batman that is presented in Dark Knight Returns. He is a child hitting things with kitty gloves in comparison to what is presented in that comic book. So, I've seen a lot of people, even very official comic media, all kinds of websites just going, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I saw Batman like this, blah, 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 blah. I'm just like, where have you been?
It could have been All-Star Batman and Robin, and my God, have mercy on our souls.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. It could have been the most violent, gratuitous, angry thing you've ever seen, and it wasn't.
A homeless man who steals the Batman costume and abducts a child and beats him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, that's Frank Miller as well.
We didn't go there. Yeah, we didn't go there.
No, that's true. I've got a question for you guys, because you know that Dark Knight Returns lore better than I do. And this is yes, you can pick holes throughout the movie, no doubt. I think there's flaws throughout, but I was happy to let it ride. I enjoyed the movie overall. But I had the one thing that bugged me, and please help me understand this better. The one thing that bugged me is at the end of the movie, and excuse the spoilers here, folks.
Wait. If you don't want to hear spoilers, skip ahead probably
couple minutes.
Couple minutes.
Yeah. So the issue for me, and this is the like I said, the one thing that really rubbed me up the wrong way is that it was Batman who decided to put together the Justice League. And as I understand the way Batman has evolved in the last 20 years or so, it's that Batman, while has never been a true fan, or really loved the concept of a Justice League, that he sort of has this belief that, sure, good can be achieved, but he also has this underlying philosophy that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
And that's why he's on the Justice League.
But the Justice League is his idea.
Yeah, the entire purpose is so that he can actually be a check and balance to superpowers, so that he can have them all in one location, so he can basically keep tabs on them.
Well, currently, there actually was a comic book arc called Tower of Babel where Batman was temporarily kicked off of the Justice League because he actually has in the Batcave documentation on how to detain and kill every single member of the Justice League should they ever become corrupted. And a criminal got their hands on this. One of the bad guys got their hands on it and used it to torture and horribly maim a lot of the Justice League. So they were kind of irked at Batman for that. But even then, in the original comics, it was Batman's idea. He's like, "Hey, we should like become a club or something." And Superman was like, "Cool, I'll be in charge." And so they just went for it. But even then, you gotta keep in mind, DC has had this thing that they do called Crisis on Infinite Earths, where they constantly reboot the continuity by having multiple dimensions crash into each other and then killing off the versions of the characters they don't like and leaving alive the versions of the characters they want to continue telling stories with. So you're literally on like the third different Batman or something in the DC comics at this point. Like that's not even a joke. It's crazy. But the Justice League was his idea. As flighty and lightly written as it was back in the day.
Yeah, but back in the day, we're talking about greater than 20 years. Though.
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah, but for me, Batman became meaty in the last 20 years. Batman has become my go-to superhero.
Oh, he's my favorite.
Years. Right, exactly.
So,
but having said that, he wanted to put the Justice League together so he can keep an eye on it. It starts to ring a bell. So yes, I can see why he wants to put the Justice League together. Dual purpose. There's two purposes for it. So okay, I'll accept that premise.
So that's how our week has been.
Yeah, that's all I've done all week is watch that movie. So.
I actually haven't got to see it.
Argue with people.
I haven't got to see it yet. But I know what to expect because I've read the comics.
See, and that's another thing too. It's like my brother and I, especially, were just losing our minds over how like the comics this was. We were so happy. If you're wondering what the heck is actually going on in this movie in its entirety, do yourself a favor and just go onto the internet and do a search for a guy called Darkseid, Darkseid. It will all make more sense.
Absolutely.
So my week has been a lot like your week, sans Batman v Superman. It's just mainly been taken up with Daredevil, like season 2. It was really good. Better than the first, in my opinion. I want to see Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Punisher, and then eventually the Defenders. I'm ready for all of that because I think...
It's all coming.
It's all coming, and I'm ready for it. I love how they do the crossovers. Like, they put minor characters in each show because they're happening around each other. I thought that was pretty cool. So if you pay attention, you'll be like, hey, that's that person from that's from Daredevil. Oh, that person's from Jessica Jones. Wait, they're this close to each other? It's pretty fun. It's pretty fun. My wife likes doing that.
Yeah.
The $1 million question, will they be in Avengers 3?
Good question.
That is a good question.
Well, I mean, isn't Civil War Avengers 3, really?
It's 2.5.
Yeah, 2.5.
Yeah, I guess.
Also, just to go there, I think it's funny that some people have actually been like, superheroes fighting each other, Batman versus Superman. I'm like, yeah, guess what's coming up next from Marvel? Same plot.
Yeah. They're trying to beat Marvel to the punch. It's not going to work, guys. You can't stop that train. It's been too long coming. It's built up too much speed. All right, let's talk about this week's topic.
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that.
Oh, man. So this week's topic is also literature, but it's a different kind of literature that I discovered by happenstance. Like, it was a fluke, especially because it was written almost before my time, pretty much. And the way it came about was really interesting. So, in school, I had a diverse set of friends. I was the guy who could be friends with anyone. A lot of it had to deal with the fact that I was the nerd who also played baseball for 15 years. So that kind of gave me an in with pretty much anybody I wanted, which was nice. And there was this guy at school who I found really interesting because he wasn't really like anybody else. He was what you would call... He was a legitimate hacker. It was the first person I ever encountered who could... he would sit at school on the school computers and he would do multiple proxies and he would be bouncing signals off stuff and he'd be like doing all this shady stuff. And if you surprised him, he'd hit a button and all the programs would close. So needless to say, he intrigued me and I became friends with him. And it wasn't just his hobby interests that ended up blending with me. It was the fact that we developed this relationship where he would bring books that he thought I would like to read. And so he's the reason I ended up reading Raymond Feist. He actually brought me the first book and was like, hey, I think you might like Magician's Apprentice. And he basically fostered a love for that author that has spanned, the entire 30 years that Raymond Feist wrote his main novel series. So when he came to me, it was for a band trip. I said, is there anything you have to read that, can tide me over for a long trip? Because we're going way far away for a band competition and I'm going to be stuck on a bus for hours. And he reaches into his backpack and he pulls out this book. And it's called Lone Wolf. And he says, now this is completely different than any other novel I've given you to read. And I look at it and I said, what do you mean? He goes, it's a book that you play as a game. And I thought, well, that's weird. What do you mean play as a game? And he opens it and he shows me, it's like a choose your own adventure, but you will get into combat encounters. You will have to make choices about what items you pick. You have to make choices about how you build your character, what skills you take, what equipment you pick up. And I was like, okay, this sounds really cool. I've never seen anything like this. And when it came time to go on the bus trip, I don't even remember where we went because all I remember is reading that book nonstop. Because it was something I'd never encountered before. It had a lot of the systems that I was used to seeing in Japanese role-playing games, like the idea of random encounters and leveling up and all this other stuff. But it was focused mainly on things like survival and using detective work. As sparse as it was novel, but in a way that I still enjoy today. I still enjoy these books, as clunky as they can be. So I got this taste for these books, and I asked him, do you have any more? And he goes, no, I don't have any more. But I tell you what, you can just keep this book. Take this book, and you can start your collection. And the game turned into a real-life adventure for me where I, up until today, still go to used bookstores and scour bookshelves like thrift stores to look for Lone Wolf books. And I know that I could go online and easily purchase them, but it's become kind of like a ritual for me, this hunting down of these crazy books. And I don't have them all, but I have a bunch of them. I have multiple copies. And from time to time, if I have to go somewhere where I'm going to have to sit around, instead of grabbing just a regular novel, I'll take one of these Lone Wolf books and play through them again. Like my version of Flight from the Dark, the first book, is almost worn completely apart from how many times I've played it. And I think that's what I enjoy the most about getting them used, is when I get them, like they'll be, you can see where people dog-ear pages, and you can see the crease in the spine. And there's this kind of lore that's outside the book of like somebody else, I can tell when I look at it, enjoyed this book as much as I did because they've worn it down before it passed to me. And it creates this like this community that we will never meet, we will never see each other, but we pass the book to each other. And I think that's incredible. I think it's a unique experience that I've never really had with a book before.
That is cool, actually.
Yeah, it's like this idea that I can see the history of the book. I can see if there's a stain where somebody spilled something, or I can see a part where they dog-eared it because it was a really intense choice they had to make, so they didn't want to lose that space and have to start all the way over.
Can I ask how old were you when you first came across it?
Let's see. I was probably about 14. 14 is when I encountered these books.
Yep.
So I was very much into my years of playing video games, and this book series helped foster an appreciation for eclectic things. Like I have since then started collecting things like fighting fantasy, which was Lone Wolf was created by Joe Deaver and Gary Chalk, and some people may not recognize that unless you're in the world of hobby gaming, so like painted figures like Warhammer. You'll recognize Gary Chalk because he wrote for the magazine White Dwarf, which is it was a big tabletop hobby gaming magazine back in the day.
Yeah, that name's very familiar to me.
Yeah, and the other book series that I started collecting is the fighting fantasy books, which were created by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. And this Steve Jackson isn't Steve Jackson Games from America. It's Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone, some of the co-creators of Games Workshop. So I have come to learn that a lot of this revolves around Games Workshop, Warhammer, war games, and eventually Dungeons and Dragons, which I think it's funny that some of the most influential works that I've read, like Raymond Feist, they exist because of Dungeons and Dragons. Joe Deaver and Raymond Feist both created literary works based on the campaign and the world that they made playing Dungeons and Dragons with their friends. I think it's incredible how we talk about, Tolkien had such a huge effect on fantasy, and then a derivative of his work was Dungeons and Dragons, and then there's all these other derivatives that have spawned from it. Mm-hmm. And the cool thing about Lone Wolf is it's not traditional fantasy. So it's not so much orcs and elves. It's more like weird things, like centipede tentacle monsters and stuff that is just really trippy. So it's not very traditional. It ends up having certain sci-fi elements, which is kind of cool.
So he obviously made an effort to create his own creatures, his own world.
Yes.
Add his own influence, right?
Yeah, and one of the fantastic things about the books is the artwork. In the first few books, Gary Chalk does the artwork, and his artwork is very unique. It's not what you would call standard artwork. You can tell it's influenced by older artistic stylings of like the 70s. Yeah. So it's not very angular. Like the faces and stuff are very rounded, like enemies' faces. Like if you're fighting a bandit, his face will be more bulbous and composed more of circles than angles. And it's a very unique art style that I think is very good, very cool. It always spurred my imagination. Like I love the detail of things. Like I'm sitting here, I have the book. Like I have to hold this book because it's so cool. Like even now I want to flip through it and read it, even though I know everything that's going to happen. What's funny is in school, I got to where I was finding these books and reading them so much, I got in trouble several times because I would read the books so much that in the back, the way you choose how a random number happens is there's a little printed page of a chart, and it has numbers on it. And you're supposed to close your eyes and then touch the page. Well, I had played the game so much that I knew where the highest numbers were just by instinct. So I had to start bringing a dice that I could roll, and I would get in trouble several times and have to defend myself. Like, what are you doing? Why do you have a dice? And I was like, I'm reading a book. What kind of book involves a dice?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, look, I finished my practice exit exam. You'll get your funding. Let me read my book.
And roll my dice.
Yeah, roll my dice in my lap.
Yeah, I was noticing that myself as I was going over it, how almost immediately I looked at that chart. What do they call it? Random number table, and I was just like, "There's no way that flies with me. I'm gonna need a dice."
Yep.
I would totally hose that, saying I'd be 9 every time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's funny because it's not that these books are, the pinnacle of literature. There's just something about it that I have never been able to pin my finger on. It's just fun. Like, I have so much fun. I think it's because it follows a singular character. So you're building your character, you're progressing book to book, where like the next book they're like, okay, you get to pick another skill, and then you get to pick another skill, and eventually your character evolves. He goes from a Kai, the rank of Kai, which is the order that you're a part of, because you're some kind of traveling warrior monk, which is also unique and cool. You're not some kind of knight. You like spend time up in the mountains learning discipline and communicating with nature and stuff, while also learning sword fighting and speaking ancient languages. I always thought that was neat. But eventually you progress through the books and you become a Kai Lord. And so you've learned all the basic tenets, and then you start learning master versions where it's like you can't just sense the feelings of an animal. You can start to command them. You can calm them at your will. Instead of being able to move small objects with telekinesis, you can actually start controlling people's minds. So you start progressing until you eventually become the grand Kai Lord who can bend space and time to his will and like know all the ancient languages of the universe. It is always really cool how it creates that power fantasy that I didn't encounter until many years later in video games.
Basically, you become overpowered.
Yeah, you become pretty overpowered. But what's funny about this book series is that one of the biggest complaints about it is that your character is in a binary state. You're either alive or you're dead now.
I noticed that too. I was looking at the combat and it was like, fight this monster. If you win, go to the next page. And I was like, that's very binary.
Yep. Yeah, it's very binary. And what's funny though is that the book series was designed so that you don't have to start from the beginning. Like every book, you can just start wherever. He goes, here's how your strength should be. Here's a basic set of equipment. Go. Which
I appreciate that kind of thing. I like it when you don't have to own every single part of something. I mean, when we get there, one of the complaints a lot of people had with Mass Effect 3, was the structure of the game, and I'm basically screaming to the bloody heavens. But what if someone's never played 1 and 2? You can't just make the game on the assumption that they've played part 1 and 2. You have to have a standalone, setup and character arc for part 3. And I noticed that looking through the books also, like you mentioned, you can have just one of these books and play through it, and he will give you a set of stats that you should have. But it's clearly intended that you have all of them for the complete experience. I find it amusing that in the first book, for example, at the start, after you've created your character, you have this thing called an action chart. It says, if you successfully complete the mission as set in Book 1 of Lone Wolf, you may add a further Kai discipline of your choice to your action chart in Book 2. So you actually get a bonus if you have multiple books that you wouldn't have otherwise, because the instruction only exists in Book 1 to have this benefit in Book 2. And then it actually goes even further to what I thought was hilarious, was the very end of Book 1, quite frankly, just states, if you wish to accept the quest of the Summer's Word, begin your adventure with Book 2 of the Lone Wolf Adventures. And I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Yep. I think that's why I prefer this book series to something like Fighting Fantasy. Because Fighting Fantasy, the books are like, each one is kind of like a standalone adventure where it's like, you are, stop this evil. But, Joe Deaver was like, you are the last of the Kai. You are it. You are like, so you're given a role. It is very much role playing. I mean, it's a character he made up, but you get to decide how it grows and where it goes and what equipment you pick up. And if you play further in it, there are lots of things where there are items you can pick up in the first book that will come back in like book 7. It's like, do you have this talisman? And you're like, yeah, I have this talisman. Well, when you approach these cultists, it starts burning your flesh from the evil ritual they're doing, and now you're exposed. It's like, oh crap. This thing I picked up in book 1 is now having an effect in my game way later. Which I always thought was cool, how he was mindful of that. The problem that appears to be the worst is the Summer Sword. It's such a vital part of the game that if you pick up one of the later books where you're supposed to already have it, you're kind of screwed. Because it does all kinds of things. It repels dark magic. It can easily kill the creatures of the Dark Lords. And so if you're standing there with a regular sword, it's just like, get wrecked. GG. And that isn't to say that you can't beat it, because there will be other items. So it'll be like, did you pick up the crystal gem? And it's like, as the Dark Lord shoots the laser beam at you, you hold up the gem and it refracts and it bursts, and like a phoenix flies out and eats the Dark Lord. And you're like, oh my God, that was awesome. But yeah, these books, I think I enjoy hunting them down as much as I enjoy reading them, just because of, like I explained, that shared history. And what's interesting is that for many years, Joe Deaver has tried to make a video game out of them. And he's made a couple, but none have been very successful, I guess is the term I'm looking for. He was trying to make a sandbox game years ago where it had parkour elements and stuff, which I thought was incredible. Like, he was going to have it where you see a mountain, you just climb up it so that you could go wherever you wanted. And he was trying to get a Chinese company to help him. But the best version of the actual game, and I don't mean the books, was a mobile game of all things, which is crazy because you would think in the current mobile game market that would be a disaster, but it's actually really good. I really enjoy the vision of Lone Wolf as this mobile game, because you still have to pick things like, what are you trained in? Are you trained in animal kinship? Are you trained in telekinesis? Are you trained in tracking or hunting?
Yep.
And in between the action sets, so like the combat stages, he actually makes you read instead of walking around a 3D world. So it's a blend of the dynamics of a video game with his original vision of a choose your own adventure, which is kind of neat. And when it transitions to action scenes, it actually starts out as a drawing that then comes to life.
Yes.
Yeah,
that was very cool.
I really like it. The theme that you're going to hear at the beginning of this episode is from that. So if you're interested in it, it is something you can pick up. I think it actually does cost like a couple dollars, because it's not like a free to play game.
No, it's not. It's actually for the whole thing is $17.99. But you can play Act 1 for free. So even if you just want to get a feel for what it's like, you can pick up Act 1 for free.
So more than that recommendation, I recommend the website that I mentioned last week, projectaeon.org. So I talked about how hard it is really hard to find these books, because they're so far out of their time that they're just disappearing. And
they're as old as we are.
Yeah.
The first one, I think, was 1984.
Yeah, it was. And so...
I'm excluding
old as you guys, shall we say it that way?
I'm excluding you.
Hey, thanks.
You were cognizantly aware when this occurred.
Yeah.
Sort of.
So Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone actually did a reprint of Fighting Fantasy, which means that they are easily available. All the versions of the Fighting Fantasy books that I have are mint condition, brand new, like never been touched. And all the Lone Wolf books I have are all worn and old, like they've yellowed, which I think I always love it when books yellow. I mean, I know they're being destroyed by time, but I love that worn feeling. And they get that old book smell. I'm being such a librarian right now. So Joe Deaver actually tried to do a republishing. It was a Hardworks hardcover republishing, and they had colored art in them. And I really wanted to get them, but they were mainly sold in the UK because that's where Joe Deaver and Gary Chalk are from. So I missed out on getting them, and I was looking, and they are ridiculously expensive. It's like the cheapest ones are $100 a pop because they're so hard to find, because all of them weren't printed, and the ones that were, the publishing company didn't print that many. Right. And so I'm
surprised that they haven't done a reprint.
Yeah, I mean, he's tried to get it started back up several times. He switched publishing companies several times, but they just never come to fruition. And it's a horrible shame, because I think they're still worth reading. I think they're more interesting than the standard Choose Your Own Adventures, which at the time I was reading this, I also owned like Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventures, and those were terrible because a lot of times they just ran you in circles and had only one progression path, so they were very shallow.
I remember those. The only one that was good was the one that went back to Horrorland, and even that was negated by the fact that if you'd read the book about Horrorland, or if you'd actually played the computer game that also took place in Horrorland, it was hilariously accurate to the previous media, and so you knew everything and you just blitzed right through it.
Yeah, and see, even though I've read Flight from the Dark as many times as I have, I will still be like, do I want to go meet the mage in the forest? Do I want to join the people on the main road, the caravan? Do I want to go in the hut this time and find the sword? There's so many choices that even though I know the book like the back of my hand, I still will play through it and be like, this time I'm going to go this way. This time I'm going to go down and discover the Dark Crypt.
Well, if the choices are exclusionary, yeah, I mean, that it's always going to be an interesting choice, even if you know all of the outcomes. I mean, I've played, the Mass Effect and Dragon Age games by BioWare a number of times, and I make different choices, even when I know all of the outcomes, just because, it mixes it up. It makes it different.
Yeah,
and
it changes the narrative.
Well, and also with these books, because there's a dice roll element involved, you don't technically know in some of these cases exactly how it's going to play out. So there is a little bit of, ooh, what happens this time?
Yeah, and so there are also certain encounters where it'll be like, after this many turns, if you haven't killed this thing, turn here and something else will happen. Like maybe someone else will show up or more monsters will show up, but then you have to flee, and that changes, like it takes away the control for a few pages of where you get to go because you're just running for your life.
Well, where is it? Oh, yeah. Like in the first book, there was an example where it says to pick a number from the random number table, or I guess in my case, it would be roll a 10-sided dice.
Yep.
And it said, if you have picked a number that is 0 to 2, turn to page 108. If the number is 3 to 9, turn to page 25. And it's just like, that's a random chance.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's what keeps it fresh, is that, Joe Deaver added a multitude of ways that you can be directed. So you can make a choice, you can have a choice made for you, or you can, by omission of certain items or knowledge or skills, you have to be directed certain directions that you wouldn't normally be able to go, which incentivizes you to go back, start over, pick different skills to start with to see what happens.
Yeah, and, just to bring it up, because this was my first encounter with such a concept, the Choose Your Own Adventure books that were in my grade school library. I used to get really angry at those books just because, more so than these, like whether or not you lived or died was hilariously binary. It was, make blind choices. Oh, you're in a tower and you have the choice between a rope and a flashlight. and you have to pick one of these two things, and there's nothing that indicates if you'll need it later, what you'll need it for, what the situation is, and then 30 pages later, oh, you didn't take that flashlight, you're dead. And it's like, but there was nothing that said that the rope was a better choice.
Right.
And yet if you actually do dig through the book, there's also, oh, you didn't take the rope, you're dead. And, it's just like, so my random chance when I have to make these completely uninformed decisions can get me killed. And it was really, I mean, as much fun as those books could be, because I did like the idea that, they were stories about myself, because, I'm mildly a narcissist. It was just so arbitrary in how I lived or died or was successful or what the outcomes were, that ultimately my favorite book in the entire series was one about playing baseball. I mean, that's how that went for me. 'Cause it was like, oh, I lost the game. That happens. I played baseball. It wasn't, oh, you forgot to pick up that bag of nails back there. Instead you chose the rock, and now this monster that's, weak to metal is coming after you, and you have nothing to fight it with. Ha ha ha. It's like, well, I'm sorry, I'm 8 years old. I don't know about the fantasy that, fairies are weak to iron. Cripe.
Yep. And I think the reason it never was frustrating to me in Lone Wolf is because it drives home just how dangerous this world has become. Because you're it. If you die, it's over. Because you're the only person who has information on the coming death cloud of evil. And,
Yeah, but that's different from the Choose Your Own Adventure books, because Choose Your Own Adventure is, it's today. It's you.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. That's why I hated those Goosebumps books. Good God. Not Goosebumps, not Goosebumps, not R.L. Stein, but those Choose Your Own Adventure ones were awful. What were you going to say?
I was just going to jump in here and say, this is the first time I've come across this Lone Wolf role-playing books. And to be totally honest, while I knew that Choose Your Own Adventure books existed, I actually didn't know that there were books that went into this sort of detail. And I have no doubt that if somebody had introduced me to these at the age of 14, I would have been just like you. I would have just devoured them, and these would have just been right up my alley. So having just come across them now, I absolutely see how it would grab your attention and get you sucked in and into this world, but not just choose A or B, but actually build your character, in a true RPG role-playing game type situation where you're building all aspects of your character. You're not, like I said, you're not just choosing A and B. So having gone through the links you gave us this week, and I'll be honest, maybe I'm still in the middle of night shift, so my head's a little foggy, and I will admit that the learning style that I have the most difficulty with is reading instructions. And so I think combining the two, I had a little difficulty understanding what it was that I needed to do. And I think part of it also was that I'm doing all this online, so I'm just seeing a wall of text, that if I actually had been given a book in my hand, I think I would have taken to it better.
Oh, yeah.
And have worked my way through it, even than just sort of like reading a screen of text.
Yeah, if I could, I would want everyone to own this first book, because nothing can replace having the book in your hand, because the formatting is so different. So it's a small book, kind of like a soft cover book. And
Gotcha.
So there's a limit to how much can fit on the page, whereas online they put, it's a giant column of information. And it's also online, and it doesn't help that the background of the website is like this eggshell color.
Yeah.
So
true.
You're going to run into the problems of like where your brain is actually straining to read, and it can be very fatiguing. Because I used to play through the books all the time. I downloaded, because I was afraid Project Aeon would get taken offline or it would disappear. I've downloaded every single web page for that website, and I keep it on a hard drive from years ago.
And for what it's worth, mate, if when I have absolutely no idea if these were ever released in Australia and New Zealand, but if I go into a secondhand bookstore, I'll scour through and have a look for you and see if I can find and might find a copy of a book you don't have, or I'll keep it for myself, one or the other.
Yeah, I say get one because they're fun to collect. The artwork is super awesome, and
right.
You know, I think it's a fun thing to hunt down. I think it's nice to have a treasure hunt for something that isn't that well known. It has a cult following, and it's a style of literature that surprisingly enough has exploded on Steam. There are a lot of role-play game books that have popped up on Steam, and it has been one of the most joyous things I've ever seen happen because they came out of nowhere. It's like me. It's like I didn't know this, no one really knows these books exist. But then I look on Steam and I'm like, oh, people are making these books? That means somebody out there knows about these. Awesome.
Yeah, and they're turning them into a game format. And the game format works really well for this style of book, this sort of choose your own adventure. I first came across this style with the Walking Dead series. I don't know if either of you two have played that on a mobile game.
Yeah.
But it's very similar. So, yes, I had struggled with reading and following the instructions, so I had a bit more of a search around, and I stumbled across the game, and I picked up Act 1 on my my iPad, and as I was working through this, going, oh yes, I'm familiar with this style. It works really well. Because I played through a bit of the Walking Dead series, sort of swiping the screen and making decisions and all that sort of thing. Art style is lovely, and yes, I can see the attraction.
Yeah,
I am going to go back to my iPad and grab the book, and yes, I'm going to sort of take the cheats or lazy version of going through it, where I'm not going to keep track of my inventory. I'm just going to go along and make decisions and just see where the story takes me. So
yeah, the inventory was always funny. Like you can only hold 6 items, and a lot of times the items that you'll be like, oh, this chainmail, this really helps me, and then it's like, well, you just fell off a boat, you're going to drown if you don't take off your chainmail. It's like, dang it.
Yeah, exactly. So I probably that's what I'll do to get more of a feel for the style of story, is just go through it in a more just a traditional choose your own adventure style, and maybe I'll stumble across a real life copy of a book and sort of play it through properly.
Yeah, and for people who don't, if you end up liking it, but you like more traditional novels, there is the Legends of Lone Wolf, which are basically just straight up novels that are just lore and cool stories from the world. I think the one book that I always hoped I would find when I go out to bookstores is what's called the Magnamund Companion. So we talk sometimes, we mention how Blizzard's making a World of Warcraft Chronicles where it's a cohesive lore. Well, the Magnamund Companion is that, and I've always wanted it. I have the PDF for it, but the way that it splits the pages, it breaks up all the art because it's kind of like one of those Renaissance tomes where there's a lot of detail and artwork around the pages in the paragraph, and it's ruined by a PDF. And then I looked online. I was like, okay, let's check this out. $250. No thanks. It's fine.
Yeah.
Like, what the crap?
Can I ask you, so you're 14, you discovered these books. Put this in perspective of where other fantasy influences and maybe RPG influences were. Like, does this come before or after discovering Dungeons and Dragons or, other similar role-playing video games?
Up until this point, I was playing mostly Japanese role-playing games on console because computers weren't a big part of my life until later. Like, I did
Sure.
own some computers, but pretty much the only role-playing game, which I probably want to do an episode on, was this game called Adventure Construction Set, which was
Okay.
a role-playing game about making role-playing games. It was on, like, big floppies, not 3.5-inch floppies, but like the big, fat, thin floppies from back in the day.
I miss those.
And like, that was incredible, which I will have to talk about that, because I even did a report or a video essay on that in school, like talking about Stuart Smith and how he basically inspired Todd Howard to create the Elder Scrolls series, which is why we have the Elder Scrolls construction set, is because of Adventure Construction Set. But mainly I was playing Japanese role-playing games, so Final Fantasies and whatnot.
Okay, what about literature then?
Literature at this
had
time,
you read?
I don't know. I've always been a weirdo. Like, my literary tastes are all over the place. So I would be reading Orson Scott Card one week, and then I would be reading Herodotus's The Histories the next, and like making fun of him and how tangential and crappy he was at writing history. But that also has a lot to do with the fact that I had, like, my friends, we were like not typical teenagers. It's like, hey, let's get together, and me and my friend Jeremy, it's like, hey, let's get together. I'm going to be dual booting Linux. You want to come help? Let's install Linux, dual boot that, and then let's play with MegaHowl, an AI program that learns speech patterns. It's like, all right, cool. All right, here, check out Orson Scott Card. Like, we were an odd set of people. So I was reading a lot of varied things, but this would be, I would say that Lone Wolf was well under the reading level that I was at, because at this time,
Sure.
like at this time, we were reading stuff. Jeremy and we actually gave a presentation, like a sample reading from Ender's Game, and my 9th grade English teacher, I actually convinced her to make it part of the curriculum. So it is now part of the curriculum at my school.
Cool.
To read Ender's Game. So that's the kind of stuff we were doing. We weren't doing typical teenage stuff.
Fair enough. Yeah, I was just trying to put it in perspective. Was this like a breakthrough element, or did this follow on from other fantasy RPGs? So obviously, yes, it followed on from that video game aspect, but I was just trying to see what fantasy influences you had or didn't have prior to this book.
I knew of Dungeons and Dragons, but I hadn't gotten into it yet.
Right.
It's hilarious. I've spent a disproportionate amount of time buying and reading Dungeons and Dragons. I've never actually played it because no one wants to play it, because by the time I came into it, it was old hat. Like, people.
Right.
Oh,
I've never played it either.
And
I don't even know what it looks like.
I'm
Yeah.
the only person here who's actually played Dungeons and Dragons. That surprises the crap out of me, because it's funny, I'm not like terribly excited about that sort of thing all the time. Like, I can appreciate it. I think they're cool, but maybe it's different from everyone else out there. But for me, I was struck at how much Dungeons and Dragons was really just an excuse to get together and have pizza.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's those sorts of things for me, whether I'm playing a board game, or I can imagine playing Dungeons and Dragons, or oh my god, I forgot the card game. What's the card game?
Magic the Gathering?
Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
The greatest element for me for those things, yes, I would enjoy the activity, but it's also getting together with a bunch of people and, yes, eating pizza or drinking Coke, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That's always for me the biggest thing that I want in that situation.
Yeah,
See, I just want to kill you with squirrels.
See, that's mainly what I did with my friends group. We actually had game night, legitimate game night, where we would meet up every week and play a slew of board games. It actually started as a Mystery Science Theater 3000 fan club, where we would get together every week and watch an episode, or a movie.
Sure.
And so
I've done that. It's totally worth it.
yeah, being a Misty is fantastic. Shout outs to my friends from high school. And then when I got into college, that was where I actually got to play a lot of diverse board games. So, like, I still never played Dungeons and Dragons because people, the people who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons would rather play Pathfinder, which I didn't actually own the stuff for. And I ended up playing Warhammer 40K, and I actually prefer that to D&D. and it's the pen and paper role playing game, not the hobby sculpture painting war game.
Gotcha. Yep.
Yeah, so I think the reason I enjoyed it so much, because I also played Magic the Gathering at school, which they banned for some reason because eating your lunch and quietly playing a card game is somehow disruptive.
That's where I played, just before you go on, I played Magic the Gathering at lunch and during the third quarter break for the high school band at football games, and that escalated into an arms race. We were buying and trading cards like crazy just so that my friend and I could beat the crap out of each other.
Yeah, eventually we moved it to the band room because I was in marching band, and my band director played Magic the Gathering. So we would have like Magic tournaments all the time in the band room on slow days where like there's nothing to do or it's like storming outside. It's like, all right, Magic, let's play it. But I think
so envious.
Yeah, I think I honestly think the biggest factor in what drew me to this is the fact that I'm an only child, and I lived out in the middle of. I lived out in the country where, like, every time you walk outside, there's an ambient track of banjo music playing.
I love the banjo.
I basically lived in Tom Sawyer land, where everywhere around me was cow pastures that was owned by my family. And I think a lot of the reason why it resonated with me is because I spent my childhood years going on literal adventures down to forgotten parts of woods. I would like get my backpack and I would put in a first aid kit and flashlights and lunches, and I would actually go and discover all this stuff. And because of where I lived, I would find actual Native American remnants, arrowheads and tools where they would, make things. So I could go on adventures and find ancient treasure. And this book spoke to that. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Right. Like where I lived, there was a giant oak tree where a Native American chief had died, and he was buried under the oak tree. So I could walk out my yard and see this reverent giant tree growing where a man was buried. So I think that's what drew me to the book, is this idea that I was a very adventurous person. So the idea of being able to sit quietly on my own and go on adventures when I couldn't physically do it was just my heaven.
So I was much more of an urban kid in a city. Well, not quite in a city, but sort of established suburbs of Melbourne, Australia. But I grew up very much a loner. I had a very small circle of friends. I always referred to myself as a gene short of a nerd because, yes, I still had an interest in sport. But all my friends were like sport mad, sport crazy. Sport wasn't a number one. So I was sort of just on the outside of that circle of people. So, yes, this sort of thing, if I had come across it at the age of 14, I would have just devoured. I would have just lost myself in this.
Oh, man. I think it's funny because of books like this and because of Raymond Feist, like, I actually got bullied because of Raymond Feist once because I was reading this novel called Silverthorn, and on the cover, like, there's this prince and he's trying to get married, and there's an assassination attempt made against him, and it misses and it hits his wife, and so he's holding her on the cover, and they're like, "What the crap is this? Is this some kind of romance?" I turn around like, no, actually, this is the one woman he's loved his entire life, and people wanted to kill him. And now she's poisoned with a poison that is going to kill her soon, and he has to go on a journey by himself to try and find the cure. So if you have some kind of problem with someone caring for someone else, you need to find somewhere else to go. It's like, oh, okay. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to kowtow to your bullying. I am half jock. You do not scare me. But yeah, it's funny. It was always weird. Like, people always thought I was a weirdo because I'm sitting there with this book and I'm like, rolling the dice. No. Oh, God, no, I died. Hang on, let me go back. Oh, thank God. Okay, I got the healing potion. Damn you, Dark Unicorn. You bastard. But yeah, it's fun. I still enjoy them. Like, I still look at it fondly. And I still remember, how I was introduced to it. And it's super cool. I was very, very endeared to this. And I'm glad that Joe Deaver and Gary Chalk made these in secret behind Game Workshop's back. using their the person who was over publishing, they would meet secretly at lunches and go over the book so the Games Workshop couldn't find out that they were using their facilities to print the books.
There you go.
Oh man, it's good. It's fun.
It sounds great, mate.
Yeah. That's about all I have to say. That I like the books, and I suggest anybody go to projectaeon.org and just at least check out the first book. And if you run across it somewhere, just be on the lookout, because one day you may, have some young person come up to you and be like, I'm going on a trip. I need a book. It's like, I happen to have Lone Wolf. Try this out. because of the books, I actually did end up spending a lot of time writing my own. Like, I never tried to go anywhere with them, but the idea that I could craft my own adventures. And a lot of times they mirrored my own life, where you were always out in the woods and you would walk out and you would gather your pack and you'd get your... For some reason, I was obsessed with whips, like not in like a weird way, but like a whip. I was like the Indiana Jones style. It was like, you get your whip, you get your backpack, and you go exploring. So that's Lone Wolf.
No, I was just going to say, I'm really glad you brought this one up. It's, like I said, a completely new topic for me. Never heard of this style of book, and certainly something that went into this sort of in depth. So, thanks, mate.
So that was episode 6. It's a good bit shorter than what we're used to, but there's not a lot I can say about it other than I like it. Next week, I think it's kind of up in the air. We haven't settled on what we're going to do next week. Keep an ear to the Facebook ground, which you can find us at facebook.com/InOnesKen, INONESKEN, no spaces, no apostrophe. We're also on SoundCloud and iTunes. If you're hearing us on iTunes, please give us a 5-star rating. Not just because we're pandering for a good review, but because it also helps more people discover us. We have been featured as one of the top up-and-comers in New Zealand, so that's awesome. We have. And to our fellow Kiwis, I appreciate all the support. I really do. You're supporting some dude on a podcast all the way around the planet, but I really am very thankful for the ability that I have to work with the guys that I work with. I look forward to this every week, even when I'm feeling bad. This is what I want to do, and I hope you join us. I hope you learn new things. I hope you have a good experience, and it teaches you to love things like we love things. Have a wonderful week, and see you next episode.